who here actually, so show of hands to start off, who here actually keeps an eye on social media for security purposes? Checking Facebook at work doesn't count. All right, that's a lot more than expected. All right, so by the end of this talk, the idea is that everyone should be convinced that they should keep an eye on social media. And that's for multiple reasons. A, because I'll go through sort of some of the things that you can get out of that and some of the reasons you should keep an eye on it. And B, hopefully I'll be introducing a new tool, and it's open source, that should make it really, really easy to do so the costs are low at the very minimum. So I'm a junior at Olin College. That's the whole thing. There's about 300 of us. Not very many people have heard of it, so I always got to point it out, so hopefully get the word out a little bit. I'm also an intern at Black Hills Information Security, so standard disclaimer, nothing I do is their fault, unless it's awesome, in which case it's all them. Yeah, shocking here. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple of people in this talk. The first guy is Mike. Mike is a pen tester, like a lot of us here, and he's a physical pen tester, a really, really good one. And on the other side is Sean. He's a physical security guy in charge of this place, which Mike has been given the task of breaking into, of testing their security. In case you don't recognize it, this is Apple headquarters. I picked it as a case study just because there's a lot of tweets about Apple, and it's really convenient, and also because it's a well-known company. So if anyone here is from Apple, my apologies. I'm not picking on you, just you're convenient. So there's a lot of things that Mike is going to have to worry about to get into this building, right? And there's a lot of things that Sean has to worry about to keep Mike and people like him out. You've got things like guards. You've got things like sort of the cover stories that Mike will need to get in, and the things that Sean needs to sort of defend against to know what sort of stories would be coming in. There's the layout that Mike will need to worry about. Or, on the other side, Sean sort of making the layout sort of difficult to get out. So, Mike is really obvious when he's just wandering around the building. You're worried about policy. Mike is wondering sort of what sorts of things will he do that will make him stand out, or what sort of things can he do that he can, fiddle around with a little bit and use to get in. There's the classic locks, right? Like, Mike's going to have to get past these. There's names. If you can name drop, that's certainly a valuable thing on the way in. And also the classic badges. How important are they? What do they look like? Are there security features? All of these things are important to Mike to get in. So the question comes up, where can you get these kinds of things, right? You can do it the old-fashioned way, where you actually go to Apple headquarters, you go to wherever it is you're going, you wander around, you look for things, you maybe Google a bit. But this is really expensive. It costs a lot to fly out there. It takes a lot of time, and it's sort of difficult to poke around all this, and it means that you're actually on site. It means you're at risk, right? What if there was a better way to do this? And it turns out there is. People just tell you all of these things. They just tell you on the internet. You don't even have to leave your desk. And this is just a long way of saying, of course, social media, right? People put all of this stuff up, and it's available. But it's still a little difficult to get to. And that's sort of for three main reasons here. The first one is variety, right? There's a lot of different types of media, and there's a lot of really difficulty in sort of gathering it in any sort of reasonable way. So you've got videos where you don't have any text search at all. You've got pictures where it's sort of, again, difficult to find what the picture is about. And you've got things like tweets, right, where there's only 140 characters. So just doing a text search for like Apple or Apple headquarters or Apple HQ might not necessarily net you what you're looking for, because people are working with short character limits, or people are working with, sort of weird things like that. It makes it very difficult for you to get the right sort of information you need. This is made even worse by the fact that there's just so much of it. I mean, you guys have seen social media, right? There's so much data out there, it's just impossible to deal with all of it. And also there's a third term that starts with V that means origin. I couldn't come up with one. And the idea here... The idea here is that it's spread out, right? There's no one place you can go and get all of this data. There's, some of it's over in Twitter, some of it's in Flickr, some of it's in YouTube, and it's kind of a pain in the neck to go gather it into one place. So the thing that we found actually ties most of this together is location. So it turns out if you're trying to defend Apple headquarters, if you're trying to break into Apple headquarters, tweets and Flickr photos and everything like that that's around Apple headquarters is probably about Apple headquarters. Big surprise there. And so it's really, really useful to be able to gather the stuff around the headquarters, the stuff that's geotagged, the stuff that's actually, someone has told you it's there, which means it's very topical, it's very informative, it's very relevant, and that's the sort of stuff you want to look at. And so a tool that I've been working on to sort of help with this sort of stuff is called Pushpin Web. We're going to be talking a lot about that today. The basic idea of Pushpin Web is that we gather geotagged social media data, and then you can sort of go through that, you can view it, and you can use it for whatever sort of things you're looking at using it for, which we'll get into in just a moment. Whether you're on the Mike side or the Sean side, this is a really powerful tool to let you gather this data in a way that doesn't even require you to leave your desk. So, brief overview of the talk. We're just going to talk about what Pushpin Web is real quick, and most importantly, what it can do for you, why it's useful. We'll skim over how it works, and then we'll skim over how to get started, and then we'll go for questions at the end. One of the huge things I actually want to get from you guys at the end of this is I have a lot of questions about what's most useful for you, what sort of features are useful, what sort of directions we can take this that will be most useful for you guys. All right, so we'll start with what it is. So the original pushpin was written by Ethan Robish at Black Hills Information Security and then rolled into ReconNG by Tim Tomes. If you haven't used ReconNG, I thoroughly recommend it. It's great. But the basic idea of pushpin web is that you put in sort of a latitude and longitude and a radius, you just give it an area it wants to look at, and out comes tweets, Flickr photos, Picasa photos, YouTube videos, Shodan results, and also whatever modules you guys add. So it's designed to be really, really easy to add modules. There may be 50 to 100 lines of Python, and you're ready to go. You're scraping a new API, a new data source, you've got whatever information you need, and it rolls right into the rest of the framework. So I've been talking about pushpin, but pushpin web is fundamentally the same thing. It's these same scripts, it's the same data sources, but slightly different. It's different in a few ways. Firstly, it's more flexible to deploy. It's a web application. It means you can deploy it wherever you want. You can deploy it out on a DigitalOcean server. You can deploy it within your own infrastructure, wherever you want to put it. And you can visit it in a web browser. You don't have to install an agent on every machine. You just whatever. As long as your people have web browsers, they can access it. As well, it's easier to use. Again, ReconNG is a command line tool, and that means that there's a certain group of people who can use it. Probably most of us in the room. And there's also a certain group of people who can't. And there's a lot of people who can't use the command line, but still need to know these kinds of things. They still need to know the kind of information that physical security is really reliant on. And having to push that over to, sort of the people who are more likely to be in this room, to the security people, to the command line people, makes it a difficult proposition, right? Because then you have the physical security people relying on the command line type of people, and that's not a great place to be. And probably lastly and most importantly, pushpin web is meant to be sort of fundamentally friendly, right? Again, it's not a command line tool, it's something in the web, and it should be a very easy thing so that anyone at the company who needs to know this sort of information can just go find it. It shouldn't be difficult to get. And of course, it can be in the cloud if you want it to be, right? It's a web application. So if cloud is in your mandate, there it is. So the bottom line is pushpin helps you see. It helps you see a lot of things. It helps you see not only the physical things that you're used to, right? Pictures, sort of where the locks are, where the guards are, but social things as well. And I think that this is really, really critical. So there's the classic physical stuff, right? Sort of the locks on the building, the layout of the building, the kind of things you need to know. But there's also sort of an overlap between the two, right? Guards, badges, cover stories, these things aren't purely physical constructs. Sure, badges exist in physical form, but they're carried by people. And a lot of how badges work and a lot of what happens around badges is determined by those people. And this is really, really important because pushpin can give you a lot of view into the people side of this that you just can't get from just taking pictures by itself or just going to the place and looking around. And then, of course, there's the purely social things as well, right? You're not going to get very many names by just standing outside a building and taking pictures from a distance. This is the sort of thing that pushpin can give you really, really good recon about without ever having to leave your desk and without, going to site. So what can it do for you? Perhaps most importantly, what can it do for you? So let's say you're Mike, right? And you're trying to do recon on Apple headquarters before heading in. Here's the main screen of pushpin as it exists right now. You've got sort of Apple headquarters right there in the center with a whole bunch of social media sort of poked around it, right? And this is just Google Maps on the top, so you can also go to satellite view, which is interesting. I don't know if that's readable up there, but it's just sort of a view of what one piece of social media looks like, right? You've got the picture there, you've got the person who did it, and you've got sort of the actual content. And you can also see down here in the corner that there's actually multiple locations. So as many things as you need to keep track of, you can with pushpin. As well, it's fun. You can actually go down to Street View. So if that's something you're interested in, you can go take a look actually what it's going to be like from ground level as well. As well, there's also a list view. So again, these aren't particularly readable, but the basic idea is that there's just a list of all of the social media data that's been pulled from sort of this location around Apple. It's got, sort of big-ish data that's, 8,000 entries over the past little while, which is really, really exciting because it means that there's a lot of historical data there you can comb through and look at. And then also, so I was writing this talk in late March, and actually new data was coming in as I was writing the talk. It's not quite real time. It's about hourly, but new stuff will be coming in pretty regularly. It's really exciting to actually see things come in as you're working on it. So there's a lot of useful information in this. Getting back to sort of how this can be useful to you guys is these pictures aren't particularly visible, but everything from here on out has been pulled out of pushpin in about half an hour of work. Just fired up pushpin, told it to look at Apple, waited a couple minutes for it to gather data, and then for about half an hour just poked through and to see what I could find. So first off, there's the locks on the door. If you zoom in a little bit, you can see it's a Prox card reader. You could perhaps find the model if you kept looking. As well as there's a security guard standing right behind the window there. It's really hard to see in this. There's some of the reflection off the window, but there's a guard standing back there. You can see the badge hanging off his belt. So it's kind of interesting to know where the guards are, and that's not necessarily something you would get from normal reconnaissance, at least not off Google Images, right? It's also interesting to note there's a guy just sort of loitering outside the door, and the guard is standing in there with his arms crossed behind his back, like he doesn't seem to be moving or reacting in any way. It's kind of interesting. If you want to go loiter outside Apple, apparently that's acceptable, right? This is sort of insights you can glean out of this sort of data without really doing much legwork. There's also a sign about restrooms outside. Sort of interesting. Like maybe you can ask them about the restrooms. Maybe that's a way to get in. And then, of course, there's the classic everyone has to wear their badge sign, right? So on the topic of badges, like badges are difficult, right? Where would you get a badge? So turns out you just type in badge. And there's a whole bunch of tweets there with people who are talking about their badges. We'll just go right down the line. So here's the first guy, right? There's your badge. It's literally the first thing after you put in badge. More interesting than that, right? You can see actually where he works. Again, it's a little difficult to read, but he works at the Arden Fair Mall at the retail location. So that's good to know. And perhaps more interestingly is another Apple employee saying, I still need to do that. Apparently, Apple's badging policies aren't particularly strict, and it's fairly easy to not rebadge on the rig. So that's interesting to know. And as well, there's all these names here, right? All of these are links to people's Instagram accounts, his Twitter account up there on the top. Like all of this is information that you can be pulling then in addition to this sort of initial information source. So next one down the line, here's two badges, right? And also interestingly, you can see they change color over the years. So the one on the left looks like, badge photo for the new year. So that must have been the last year. And then this one, as of January 6, 2015, is the new Apple badge. So, that's interesting as well. And if, full actual nice badges aren't your speed, here's also a temporary badge. This guy said, my friend printed me this badge. So apparently you can actually just go in and print badges. And here's a picture of one. And if that one isn't good enough, here's the second one, right? And so you can do things as well, like this is June 27th and June 27th down there as well. So it's interesting to cross-correlate things. And it looks like if you want to print yourself an Apple badge, here's probably how you would do it. So going back to the things that sort of both Mike and Sean are worried about, you can see we've hit on almost everything here. Haven't hit layout very much, but just about everything else we've seen already in roughly half an hour of work sitting at your desk. Nothing particularly strenuous in any way. So you can get cover stories. We've got the bathroom thing. You can find where the guards are. You can find what the guards are worried about. You can find sort of policy things. You've got to wear your badge, but loitering near the entrance is all right. You can find things like locks. You can find tons of pictures of badges, all sorts of people's names, social media accounts. I'm sure if you dug deeper, you find phone numbers, everything else, right? So all of this data is just out there, and Pushpin is a great way to aggregate it. So let's just cover real quick how it works. If you guys have heard of Docker, it's horrendously insecure, but also really easy. So for now, we're going with it. And it makes it really, really easy to deploy anywhere. One thing that's really worth emphasizing right now, this is in pretty heavy alpha. It's not very secure. I wouldn't deploy it in any kind of critical location. But right now, I'm just tossing it up on DigitalOcean servers, and it's real great. And it will be much better in roughly a month through the next cycle. So here's just a quick diagram of how it works. Essentially, all it is just a web server on the front with a task queue in the back, and then going out and pulling from APIs regularly as tasks come in, throwing it in a database, and it's ready and available for you as you go on. So it's designed to be incredibly easy to get started. So all you have to do is just basically clone the repository it's in, take a look, see what the scripts are doing, very critical step, and then actually just run the start script. And all it'll do is pull down a Docker image and set it up, and it'll open it up on that port, and you're ready to go. That's the whole process. So it's designed to be incredibly easy to use. Again, if you're going to want to put this into quote-unquote production, I wouldn't put it in any place incredibly critical yet. You can set things like not using default password in start.sh. So again, it's, once you've got it set up, basically you just run that. You add some API keys, you add the locations that you're interested in looking at, and that's it. You're ready to go. It'll keep the data up to date. It pulls hourly and takes a look, and just come back and check whenever you want. Put 5 minutes a week into it of just looking through this, or see what has come in new this week, and see if there's any risks that you guys need to worry about as physical security. So the whole point of this is that it's really easy to be used by anyone, right? Like there's a lot more people than just command line people that are worried about physical security, and Pushpin Web is designed to make it so that anyone can actually get this data. Anyone can actually look at this, can actually mitigate these risks as part of their job without having to resort to sort of the more arcane tools, the more difficult command line things. So the next up things are to actually spread this out and make it more scalable and more secure in multiple Docker containers. So right now, like the web server, the static web server, is just the Python web server. Not very good. That's already been fixed using Nginx in the new version, but there's still a few bugs, still a few things being worked out. This should very soon be available as sort of a ready-to-roll open source tool. It's available right now if you just want to go poke around, do some testing with it. I was going to do a demo, but the Wi-Fi doesn't work very well, so unfortunately couldn't get internet access and show it off. But it's really easy to go use, so I thoroughly encourage you to go do it. I want to give some special thanks to Tim Tomes for writing great code. Again, a lot of the actual API pulling code is pulled directly from ReconNG and then just rewrapped in a web shell. And then Ethan Robish for sort of guiding me through a lot of this. And of course, John Strand and Black Hills Information Security for paying me through all this and keeping me off the streets. So that's me, and I've actually a few questions I'd like to ask you guys, as well as being open for questions myself, which is sort of, what is most useful about this for you guys? Like, what sort of applications do you see other than the one that I pointed out already? And then also, what should I add? Sort of where to go next with this? Of course, there's the obvious ones, right? Like it needs to be used in sort of a production capability, but also like what's most useful? What should be added? Thank you. Oh, I'd require some setup, unfortunately. There'd be like 5, yeah, so.
Okay. All right.
Awesome.
So what's the location database on this picture, or are they, how you turn on location based on those things, or?
Yeah, so right now it's just based on geolocation, which means that if you don't geotag your tweets, they won't show up here. So we don't actually go scrape metadata. Right now, all it is off of the API's geolocation features. Basically, what it was that going through every picture in Flickr and sort of scraping that metadata off of it was way too much work. Theoretically, that's definitely something that could be done. Also, I'd assume that I think Flickr does that scraping for us, actually. I think any image uploaded with that metadata automatically gets processed by Flickr. I could be wrong, but yeah, so we're using the geolocate. Basically, you send an API query that says, give me all of the photos within this area, and then it returns you the photos. So that's what we're doing here.
So Dakota, I think you're going down this guided path, right? There's no money in security. There's a lot of money in like public relations and advertising and things like that. So
Okay.
consider sort of the broader role of using your tool to tell large companies how effective their messaging is in various places and stuff like that.
So one of the things, or actually a couple points on that. So one of the things that was down that path, right, was that there's already a lot of tools that do that. In fact, there's a lot of already really specialized tools that have been worked on for years to do that. So it's just sort of like shrugged and was like, I don't really want to work on that hard. And so then did it in security instead, which is a really underserved area for this sort of thing. And then the second reason being that it looked to me like the geolocation was a little less useful for that, because all of the tweets around Apple headquarters aren't necessarily about Apple as a company. A lot of them are just sort of, here I am at Apple, this is cool, or here I am at their front gates, which is useful in one respect, certainly, that people are willing to go there. But if people aren't willing to go there, if you're not Apple, if you're, some database company that isn't, quite as sexy to the public, then I think it'd be a lot less useful to sort of look at tweets in a certain location, and much more useful to look at tweets more to sort of about your company by keyword or by some other search that I haven't thought about yet, rather than, people aren't necessarily going to your headquarters to be like, oh man, databases are great. So. That's a good point. All right. So sort of event notifications around a certain area automatically? Okay. Nice. All right. Happy hour detector. All right.
Use this to measure your effectiveness of your security awareness programs. So it's like for my building, we're around a large campus. There's nothing else near us. So there's no other signal
Okay.
My main building has 700 people. So if I'm seeing a bunch of tweets about certain things that they shouldn't be necessarily talking about,
Yeah.
it's a way of measuring how effective we are, and also helps you just kind of steer your next round of training.
Absolutely. So I actually looked at NSA headquarters, just sort of on that and there's nothing from within NSA headquarters, so sorry guys.
I thought about setting up rules for tweets and kind of alerts of that is
Okay.
something that would be potentially interesting.
Sounds great. We should talk. Yeah, by the way, I'll be here for the rest of today. My contact information is up there. Just come talk around. I'm an intern, so like I don't have any of that high and mighty stuff. Just a dude who's here. Yeah. Anyway. All right. Anything else?
Could you riff on that, right? I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts on whether there might be a nice, event triggering mechanism that comes in, like, how can we get this less than 5 minutes a week worth of effort by putting in some more automation beyond the ones we already have?
Yeah, so I thought about basically looking at spikes in a certain area. So if there's a lot more tweets than usual or a lot more, whatever than usual in a certain area in a certain time, then that's certainly indicative that there's more people there, there's something interesting going on that they're posting about. One of the reasons I didn't do that was just, well, A, time, but B, because right now there's no sort of external processing. It pulls down the data, puts it in the database, and then just doesn't worry about it. There's certainly another level that I think could be done where it actually then goes back and looks at it and does more post-processing on the data. Not there yet, but certainly interesting.
Do you know, does Twitter have an API that allows you to look for spikes like that externally without consuming the entire campfire host?
I don't think that there is.
You can't just do, like, for instance, in Seattle, we have protesters who come and do things like put an enormous bug above the Starbucks logo.
Okay.
To get big in Seattle. So, like, having a whole bunch of tweets right around Starbucks headquarters is important even if they don't say Starbucks.
Yeah, okay. I don't think that's in the API, but that certainly shouldn't be too hard to add as sort of a post-processing feature onto this. So actually, let me go back just a little bit. There's already a volume graph down here on the bottom. Going all the way back. Yeah. So there's this guy down here on the bottom that already does these volumes. But that certainly could be added as a post-processing step where instead of just displaying it, it actually goes through and flags it as well.
So a thought I had, Dakota, was maybe we could, say we could, it's not like this, but maybe we could extract some of the data, post-processing it, and stick it in Elasticsearch and do some data analytics on it.
Sounds like fun.
Are you guys planning to develop a shared certain geolocation? Maybe I'm thinking in terms of text, in terms of water report or text, like there are many different places around the company that there's still very good information that people gather as a text from like places around the company.
Got it. Okay, so common places to go out to lunch or go to, like, yeah. So that's actually a really good question. I noticed when I was digging through the Apple data that there was this place right here. It's like some restaurant and pub, right? So I can only assume that this place has tons of Apple employees at it all the time. So I was wondering about that, but I couldn't think of any way to actually flag that those employees are going there regularly without then going back and pulling all of the data for a certain person. Which is actually another thing that I'm thinking about doing is basically you just feed in like a person's name or a person's media account, and then it just goes out and spiders as much as it can and pulls back sort of a dossier. Which then, yeah, is actually a really good point that you could then find, wow, I found 5 Apple employees and they go to this place pretty frequently. Yeah, that's a really good point that you could sort of cluster them outside of their headquarters. Where do the employees here commonly go?